Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first live session of the week. We do these normally 3 times a week. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 o'clock. Let me just put up the risk warning before we start. I think it could be an interesting week again this week, particularly for stock markets. We did see stock markets under pressure for most of last week. Bounced back quite a bit on Friday, but they've started off overnight anyway, an overnight trade, weaker again. So I really do think stock markets could be one to watch. But actually, what we're going to do, first of all, we'll talk about the major announcements. It's a big week for European announcements. We've got UK unemployment tomorrow. Then on Wednesday, there's Eurozone GDP. So how well is the European economy doing? The expectation is for growth of about 0.5% in the last quarter. Then on Friday, we've got inflation data for Europe at 10 in the morning, expected to be, I think something like 0.7% month on month. So we'll see. So a fair bit of data coming out this week. But I think the risk warning has been up for long enough. So let's take a look at what's been going on. I thought for a change, we will start with the bigger mover. And the bigger mover at the moment is Bitcoin. So let's just take this out. And I think really I was having a quick look around for any news, what's driving this higher. And I don't think there is anything. I think we are just seeing buying fueling more buying here in Bitcoin. I think there was some news last week that Fidelity, the giant US financial institution, is going to start allowing its institutional clients to trade a Bitcoin product. So I think maybe that helped a little bit. But I think overall, we're just seeing an extension of this momentum that's been going. You know, we were looking at Bitcoin back at the beginning of April on this big break that we saw. And I was saying back then, this does feel a little bit different to the other moves we've seen in Bitcoin recently that just fade away after a surge of a few days. It held on to around about the 5,000 level after the break. And we can see for May so far, the price is up almost $2,000. You know, so that is a chunky old move for Bitcoin. Clearly, touching 7.6 yesterday. Maybe after this sort of move, we'll have a bit of a slide, a bit of a correction. I think I said a couple of weeks ago I'd been looking to buy in, missed it, and I've been sat on the sidelines. I think we did buy it in one of these sessions. There we go, at 5,200. I can't remember when that was, but we did buy it there. But for me, if it sells off, it still looks like a buying opportunity. But let's see what happens. Let's take a look at the hourlies just to pick up on some of the short-term levels. So you can see just again that the steepness and the acceleration of the move so far in May. We've left so much support behind. 5,500, a bit just below 6,000. Most recent support for me from over the weekend around about 67.50, 6.6 for 67.50. So let's see what happens, but still positive. You know, is the message here. That trend on Bitcoin is still definitely up. It would be nice to get a half decent correction from these sort of levels, flush out some weak hands and see how far this goes down before I expect buyers to come back in and another push higher. But Bitcoin is really moving for me. Let's get back to somewhat more traditional markets, shall we say. Let's start off with US stock markets. Of course, I think the big news last week was the ongoing trade war and the tariffs, the imposition of tariffs on Chinese goods. We saw the market, the major indices under pressure for most of last week. But we did see this big reversal on Friday, and this is why I think today could be a really interesting day. Let me just explain why. Let's make this a shorter term chart. Let's go back to Friday. So Friday was the 10th. So it's this chunk here. Let's get rid of the RSI for now. So it's this chunk here that we're looking at. So let me just go into there. So on Friday, it's about here that official trading started. So about 2:30 UK time. And you can see the trend for the week had been clearly down. The S&P had been breaking lows all week, breaking short-term lows. And Friday was no different, right? It pushed again by about, 4 o'clock UK time. It had pushed below Thursday's low. So it still looked really bearish. But it did show some stability. And what's really interesting to me anyway, is what happened into the close on Friday. Look at that. So we had this massive recovery that looked like that. So on Friday, it moved to new lows for the week, but completely turned it round, broke through Friday's earlier highs, and just about nudged its way through Thursday's highs as well. Okay, so that was quite a positive finish to the week. That's quite a turnaround. But it did leave us with, I think this still is a hurdle. You can see. Oh, let's get rid of that. So we had May the 8th, May the 8th, May the 8th. This big resistance left from May the 8th ahead of sort of 2,900 was a big barrier. So I was thinking, well, if we see a bit of weakness today, it still looks like a buying opportunity. And what we've had in the overnight market is actually quite a lot of weakness. Okay, so we've gapped lower and are still drifting. So I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch this afternoon. I think what will be interesting, we'll look at the Dow and the Nasdaq in a minute, but if we push towards Friday's lows, so on the S&P, about what, 28, just below 28.30, that sort of area, do we see the buyers come back in again? So it could be a low risk, high reward opportunity. I mean, clearly, if we break below the lows, I think we've got, more bearish moves to come. But so it's really interesting. That's the level for me to watch this afternoon, 28.24. Let's see what happens. I am expecting these markets to try and stage some sort of recovery after what is expected to be a weaker open at 2:30 UK time. But let's see. Let's have a look at the Dow as well. Then we'll do the Nasdaq. Then we'll come back to the European indices. Here we go. Let's just bring that one up. Here we go. So here's the Dow move again. So the Dow move again on Friday. I'm guessing it's a similar sort of move. Here we go. Just trickles below the Thursday lows. The Thursday lows about 25.5. The Dow slips about 25 points below those lows. And again, massive turnaround. And again, in Asian trade, we've seen this market gap open lower and drift. So again, we should be watching those 25,500 lows on the Dow. It also, ties up with some big levels on the Dow from back in March, 25,200. So a few hundred points lower than where we are now, but potentially big support. So again, looking to see if these markets can turn it around again this afternoon. But I do think with this ongoing trade tariff talk and all of that, I think stock markets are going to be very much in focus. And then finally, the Nasdaq for the US. Let's have a look. So the Nasdaq, same sort of stuff. The Nasdaq, we'd seen fresh all-time highs during late April, early May. We've seen the market give up 400 points, about 5% or so since then. Going into this afternoon, let's watch those lows from Friday. So the Friday lows about 74.20 on the Nasdaq, 57 points below where we are now. The RSI is heading to its most oversold for the year so far. So we haven't been this low in 2019. The last oversold signal was back here in December. So 7,400, 7,420, the level to watch on the Nasdaq. Okay, before we leave US markets, let's just quickly mention the Uber float. So Uber floated on Friday. And there we go. There's a daily chart of Uber. I'm sure we can do some great analysis on that. But let's flip it over to a short-term chart. This is what it looked like. So they were priced at, was it $45 in the end, wasn't it, in the IPO? Priced at 45, opened at 42.5. They did recover, but they didn't. But 45 looks like it's, but even after one day of trading, this 45 level clearly been something of a ceiling on Uber, and then ended the day pretty much near the lows for the day, just below $41.50 in there. So let's see what happens this afternoon with Uber. I suppose if you were trading it just off that chart, then coming into this afternoon, you might be looking to see if there's any strength with a stop ahead of the lows. But I think well publicized over the weekend. You wouldn't say it was a flop, but something of a disappointing start. For what has probably been one of the most hyped IPOs for some. I should say as well, if you want any markets looking at, just put it in the favorite, not in the favorites, in the questions in the YouTube chat. Right, let's bring it back to European markets. So let's look at the DAX. I think the DAX is interesting down here, but here's the DAX. Okay, so end of April, beginning of May, the DAX had pushed to its best levels since about September last year. In common with these other indices, it has given up gains. But what's interesting is what's going on sort of right now. So last week in the DAX, again drifting, following these US markets lower. Strong finish on Friday. Okay, strong finish on Friday, and then it's gap lower today. So it finished off about 12,180 on Friday. Starts trading about 100 points lower in Asian trades. Asian trade last night or this morning? Sorry, this morning, 7 o'clock this morning. But I suppose what's interesting here, it is for now just about flipping around those lows from Thursday of last week. So the Thursday lows were about 11,950. The market has traded 11,940 this morning. So I think there's a couple of ways of playing this. The aggressive trade is to be a buyer at 11,970 with a stop under today's low. So that's the trade where we're assuming that the quick slip below Thursday's low is a false break. So that I think that's an interesting trade down here for the more aggressive. If we take this out a bit, we do still have big support still left at about 11,850. So for the more patient, may want to see what happens when US markets open this afternoon, and if we drift nearer to these old lows left from April. But it's all for me. This makes stock markets really interesting because we had such a strong finish on Friday, and now we're seeing a really weak start to the week. So I think we can expect today to be a volatile day in the US, and I think it does bode well in terms of trading for the week ahead. And then finally the FTSE, then we'll get into our other markets. So let's see what the old FTSE is doing. Let's bring that up. Let's bring it up on a daily. First of all, just to remind ourselves where we are. So the FTSE in April traded as high as 7,500, given up 300 points since then. Slipping back towards big support. So it's sort of bounce or bust time for the FTSE. Lots of support running 7,050 through to 7,150. So support about 50 points below these current levels. We saw buyers coming in about 6 weeks ago. So let's see what happens with the FTSE. So again, clearly going to be dictated by what happens in US markets. But again, you can see the gap this morning. Strong close on Friday, gap lower this morning, holding in the area of the lows for the last couple of days of last week. Again, the aggressive trade, if you thought this morning's sell-off was overdone, would be stops below the low for the day so far, which are about 71.85. Yeah. I mean, personally, I'd probably rather wait for US markets to open because it is quite a big move overnight, and that maybe we need a bit of direction from these US markets to know what's happening next. Gold. Let's do gold and oil. Gold. Here we go. It's a funny market, gold, recently. I think, as you know, I think I've been saying for a while now. I've been buying. I had been buying into this recovery. I've not added to the position for a bit because it's not been going up. But I'm sort of long gold and still, for now, hanging on to this uptrend. We are still in this uptrend from August last year, from 1160. Just at the beginning of May, it made new lows for the year, which is never a good sign if we're 5 months into the year and it suddenly sets a new low for 2019. But I think I remember saying back then, it really was sort of in the last chance saloon for this recovery in the price of gold. And so far, this trend line has held. So for me, for my own positions, if it starts trading below 1260, I am going to start questioning the validity of being long gold. It's maybe time to start getting out. For now, at least, the last few months have seen the price slide, but the bigger trend is up. So I think it's all about, well, what time frame are you trading? So, because you could argue, and I think it's a fair argument, that recovery off those highs in Feb is still going. There we go. It's doing a pretty good job of holding any recovery in gold. So I think the level to watch this week, we're currently trading at 1282. 1290. If we can break through the highs from last week, around about 1291, let's say, I think then we've got a half decent chance of, okay, let's finally get a move on and get back into the 1300s, because we do have, for fans of patterns, something of a triangle-y pattern going on here. So 1291, we need to break that. If we don't, and it slips back and breaks 1260, 1265, I think the risk is we're going to see a deeper sell-off. So Perhaps the immediate risk is we just have a boring week in gold where it trades in a tight range. But I suppose, for adding to the bulls argument, it has held above the trend line, but it is still trapped within this downtrend. So it's an interesting one to watch, and we'll come back on Wednesday and we'll see if anything's changed with these ranges. Right, oil. I can see on another screen that oil is having a bit of a move today. Let's have a look. So let's bring up the oil price. Someone's asked for Brent crude as well, so we'll do that. We'll do our usual US flavor crude. I'm always interested, actually, what do people actually trade? I mean, I always look at US crude, but I don't know if people prefer to trade the UK version. But anyway, here we go. Here's our US crude oil chart. So it's interesting. The first time the RSI went oversold in 2019 was back here the other week. And so far, it was that move to 60. So far, that has held. So for me, again, it has lost some momentum this month, the oil price. But for my money, the recovery is still... Am I pushing it? I am pushing it a bit, actually. Yeah, I am pushing it, saying it's still intact. It's clearly fallen out of that trend. It's fallen out of that trend. But for me, just because a trend breaks, doesn't necessarily mean, oh, that's it. We're going down. Everything's completely changed. It's the markets, unfortunately, aren't that perfect. Maybe we're going to carry on with that trend just at a slower pace. So for me, the really big level on oil at those old highs and those old lows, $58 pretty much sort of here, that sort of level, 58, 57 and a half. So for me, still positive. $60 held in May. Let's flip this over to an hourly chart. Here we go. We'd had pretty boring trading for last week, pretty sideways. But there's the floor at 60 so far. So 60 to 61 has been a floor. It is having a bit of a move today, the oil price, but maybe let's not get too excited, because all we're doing at the moment is pushing towards the top of that range. So 63 is the ceiling and 60 is the floor. And that's been the situation pretty much for most of May. So clearly we need to break 63. So arguably the aggressive strategy here is to be a seller into this strength. If you want to be a bit nimble and jump in and out, we are at the top of the recent range for oil. So if we really want to go short, it's overbought on the RSI. If we really want to go short, we're up here at 62.58, 62.60, and stops above 63 maybe. So 63 is the level that needs to break. So I still think that the bias in oil is still up. It has lost some momentum over the last, a couple of weeks or so. But personally, I would think the probability is for it to move $6 higher rather than $6 lower from here. Famous last words. Let's see how that one pans out. But over the last week, it's been a little bit boring. Let's take a look at Brent crude, see if that's any different. So the UK flavour of oil. It looks a little bit different, actually. Here we go. So here's again the recovery. The recovery in Brent from $50 a barrel to pretty much 75 in April. Again, that trend has slackened off. Let's flip it over to the short-term stuff. Brent is again, it's breaking through the highs for last week. Can it get through this sort of final hurdle up at 71.50? So again, I suppose the aggressive strategy here, be a seller into this strength. Let's pick up on the level. Be a seller into this strength. Up here. Oh, I can't draw it. Okay, up there. My phone seems to be getting a bit crazy at the moment. Sorry. So up here, a seller into this strength at 71.50, looking for it to run out of steam again, and maybe a stop or even a stop and reverse above 71.50 somewhere. So I think some key levels to watch in oil this week. It's been a bit of a boring week last week. Maybe things will start to spark up a little bit this week. And finally, the currencies. So let's take a look at the euro and the pound, of course, as usual. What should we do first of all? Let's do the pound, because I still think the pound is a bit of a crazy market because of the Brexit and everything. It's just choppy, isn't it? I mean, it's just a bit of a mess. So we had that move last week. Let's flip it over to a daily. There we go. So we had the move last week, which broke through the highs from mid-April, so traded up to 131.75, given back pretty much all of those gains. It's just boring. I think from a medium-term position, it's arguably a buy down here, looking for it to hook higher again, looking for maybe a run back up to those old highs. You could argue that this bit of a trend here is over, the little correction that we've been in for pound against the dollar. But as I always, caution, I think with the pound, so much can change just on a politician's sentence at the moment. We've got UK unemployment tomorrow. Normally, it's quite a big deal getting UK unemployment data, but a lot of this fundamental data is being ignored at the moment. But if you really want to be a buyer down here, we have a clear low from last week around 129.65. Okay, let's flip it over to the hourlies so we can just see that. There we go. So we had the market drift off, arguably breaking out that correction now, and we've got a floor that has emerged at 129.65. So for me, maybe we'll see it squeeze a bit higher over the next couple of days, but I think it's always a tricky one. The euro, the euro is interesting. I do still think, I'm gonna carry on saying this in the hope it does actually happen, that we could well see a euro recovery in the second half of this year. Euro against the dollar. The European economy, looks pretty weak at the moment. Germany narrowly avoided going into recession. The European Central Bank is pretty downbeat on the outlooks for the European economy. Clearly, the uncertainty around Brexit is affecting the continental Europeans as well as us here in the UK. But it continues to look really weak and then just reverse. It breaks. Only end of April we saw it break to its lowest euro dollar since back here June 2017, and the market's hooked back up again. I'd say that so I think that there's maybe at some point this year a longer term buying opportunity for the euro against the dollar. Probably not yet because the market is still looking like that. There we go. So that's really what I'm watching at the moment. And I think if we can crack these old highs from April, then maybe it starts to look like finally the euro is turning around against the US dollar. But let's see what happens. Still pretty dull day to day, but it is trying to stage some sort of recovery this month. Let's just pick up on that. Here we go. So there's the move, arguably from these April lows, and 111.10, maybe even from here, the May lows. We are trying to push a bit higher. Clearly, 112.50, 112.60 is a bit of a problem. So maybe nothing too dramatic over the next couple of days, but we do have plenty of European data as the week goes on. So let's see. So I think it's maybe a bit dull in the short term, some of these FX markets. So what are the interesting ones to watch? I think crude oil is an interesting one. Here we go, because we are pushing up. Bit of a flat week last week, but we're pushing up towards $63 for the US version of crude oil. If it can break there, maybe we'll see a stronger recovery as this week goes on. But for me, I think the excitement today is going to be in stock markets, because they've been dogged all last week by these trade tariffs. We saw a strong finish on Friday. We've given up a chunk of those gains overnight in Asian trading. So I think everyone's hanging on till 2:30 UK time to see what happens when US markets start trading. So I think that could well be the more interesting market over the next couple of days. So someone's asked to have a look at Paribas, BNP Paribas. Here we go. Let's bring that one up. See what they look like. Let's look on the dailies. There's not much point looking really short term, is there? Looks interesting, doesn't it? I think, did we look at this the other week? We looked at this the other week and we were saying that maybe that downtrend that's been going since 2018 looks to be over. And for me, looking at it now, I would definitely argue, hang on, if I could draw my line properly, that we have a little recovery chugging along. So even though it is slid, so Paribas shares have slid from about 49 euros to 45 this month. We've got this little recovery chugging. So for me, looking for some strength to come in, if I was a buyer, looking for a swing back up through 50, the closest I would want my stop is probably the other side, these April lows, but arguably the other side of the late March lows, the other side of 41. But so still weak in the short term, still weak. But yeah, looking for them to hook back higher. We looked at pound against the dollar. So if you missed pound against the dollar, covered that 3 minutes ago. So you can, I think, even if you're watching live, I think you can rewind. But it looks pretty dull, pound against the dollar. But there is a floor, so arguably we could see it squeeze a bit higher over the next couple of days. Sterling yen, the old favourite. Sterling yen, GBP, JPY. I was worried you weren't here today. I didn't see that one come up. Let's have a look at sterling yen. Let's bring that one up on the dailies. Oh, it's breaking, isn't it? It's that level is going. It's interesting, isn't it? I remember we were looking at that and seeing that old level hold, and now it's breaking. So just to put this into perspective again. So for sterling yen, we've seen a sharp move for the pound this year into March against the Japanese yen. Then we had seen, let's get rid of the squiggles for a bit. We had seen this level 143.5, 144 really stop any weakness until last week. So it does look like things are changing, doesn't it? So I think the thing is, on breaks like this, the question always is, and no one knows, is this a real break or is this, just a false break? So let's just pick up on some of these levels and see if we can construct some sort of idea off this. There we go. So there's our old big support going back to late Feb, and we've broken below. Now, if the market had broken down to here, and then we saw something of a recovery, I'd be tempted to think that maybe what we're seeing is a false break. But we've seen the market break and then push lower still. So arguably, it doesn't look as false anymore. So maybe, for me at least, the risk is that we'll see, drift back to maybe at least 141, the mid-Feb lows in sterling yen. The problem, as ever, is where do you put your stop loss? So for me, the closest I would want my stop loss is above these highs from the 10th of May at 143. But arguably, and I think a better place, is back up here at 143.50. So let's see. But it's interesting, this one now. Now it's broken below sterling yen. So broken below that big support. It does look a bit weaker. So let's come back to it. I'm sure we'll come back to it on Wednesday and we'll see where it is. But I think the risk is maybe for a bit weaker. So someone's asked Bitcoin and Ethereum, adoption or betting? I think it is betting. I don't think there's anything changed fundamentally that much for the cryptocurrencies. I think we are just seeing a little bit of FOMO going on with the cryptos. The fear of missing out. The markets, here's Ethereum, the markets are breaking higher and people are piling on board. All the crypto crazies, myself included, want a piece of the action, and I think that's what's fueled this move higher. I think we looked at Bitcoin right at the beginning today. I think that move in early April, whenever it was the start of maybe a more sustainable recovery. Let's go back to Bitcoin and see just how far it has moved. So where are we in percentage terms rather than dollars? So, this was the move that was a bit different than all other moves. So pushed the market up to 5,000 Bitcoin. Since then, it's done another 50%, so it is, I'm sure people are getting excited and saying, well, here we go, we're going back to 20,000 again on Bitcoin. It's a big move in the short term. I think, this sort of 7,000 area, 7,500 had been, quite the problem going back to September of last year. So it would not surprise me if we lost a bit of momentum up here. Those poor unfortunate souls who bought Bitcoin back in September and saw it halve might start dumping some of their coins to try and get out at break even. So maybe we see something of a pause for breath up here. But I do think this is just buying, fueling more buying. I read some of the Bitcoin news sources today and talking about golden crosses and stuff like that, all the usual cobblers. But there's no actual fantastic news that's propelled the price 50%, unless I'm missing it. And if I am, clearly leave it in the comments below. 40k, someone's calling for Bitcoin in the comments. You never know, it could happen. So that's it. So, but it's still strong. So to be serious for a minute, I would still be a buyer on dips. If we get a big sell-off down towards 5,500, it looks really interesting. And that's only a 20% move. It only took a couple of weeks to move up from there. So I think if we did see a bit of pressure, I'd still be looking to be a buyer at the moment. I do think this is the most sustainable rally we have seen, since the end of 2017 for Bitcoin. That doesn't mean it's going to 20,000, but I think it is interesting. Okay, that's it. I think we'll wrap it up today. So we'll do it all again whenever it is on Wednesday. But stock markets, like I say, big ones to watch today. I think big gap lower in Asian trade tariffs, all the usual nonsense markets are worried about. Well, it's not nonsense. So I think we could have a volatile day in the US today. So it'll be a really interesting afternoon. We'll wrap things up there. At the moment, for clients, we are not pushing out sort of alerts for these webinars from our app because we're having a bit of an issue with people not getting the alerts. So to never miss out when we go live, just make sure you're subscribed. And to subscribe, clearly just click on the button down there that says subscribe. If you click that alarm bell thing next to it, you get a notification off YouTube, sorry, when we go live and when we upload new content. There shouldn't be more than one every couple of days or maybe 4 a week. So we don't flood it, but that's the best way to find out when these things are happening. Okay, that's it. Thanks for coming along, and we will do it all again on Wednesday.